Hello everyone, and welcome to the Atlantic Council's International Day of the Girl Child event, where we'll be exploring how to close the gender gap. I'm Anna Gavell, Managing Editor at DevX, and I'm here joined today with Hannah Brixey, who's the Global Gender Director at the World Bank, as well as Nicole Golden, non-resident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Global Head of Economic Inclusive Growth at Apt Associates. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us. Nicole, let's go ahead and start with you. Why is it so urgent to be talking about girls today?
Well, really, thank you, both of you. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And I think we should be talking about girls every day, but especially today on International Day of the Girl and here in Marrakesh at the annual meetings. We know that girls have been disproportionately impacted by many of the crises and challenges that we're deliberating this week, whether that's the fallout still from the pandemic and COVID, crises, conflict, climate change, and we see that as part of that impact, the reversal of development gains that have really impacted girls and young women around the world, whether that's in education and employment and learning losses, or increases in gender-based violence and other issues that are affecting women and girls. We know that still only 1 in 5 girls complete lower secondary school, and only 40% actually complete upper secondary school. We know that the burdens of care, and in particular the unpaid care, is really dramatically falling to girls and affecting their ability to stay in school and to pursue economic opportunity. At the same time, we know that there is great opportunity. We know that there's the potential for the girl dividend and to really help close the gender gap through and with girls. And so that's the reason we're here talking about girls with such urgency, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation.
Thanks. Now, Hannah, the bank has been behind much of the seminal research and evidence of the economic returns to investing in girls, especially in education. Can you just talk to us a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Anna. I'm really delighted to be here today at the annual meetings, because the annual meetings actually highlight how girls' education is key for country development and also for addressing global challenges. And in fact, the investments in evidence by the World Bank and of course others make a clear case how girls' education matter and also what works to bring girls to school and to translate girls' education into greater opportunities for young women and for the society as a whole. So let me give you a few examples. It's clear from evidence that education, and girls' education in particular, helps people to have healthy and productive lives. And it also elevates productivity in the whole economy. So the whole economy and whole society benefits, as well as girls, young women, and men all benefit. Second, what works? We see that it is not so easy to promote girls' education. What it takes, especially in adolescence, is to incentivize and enable families to send girls to school. So perhaps sometimes for poor families it's important to receive some cash transfers with incentives to continue sending girls to school. It's also important to ensure that schools are safe for girls, that transport to schools is safe, that there is sanitation adequate for girls, that there are facilities for menstrual hygiene. So there are different aspects that need to be addressed so that girls can continue through education through secondary and higher levels. And then importantly, we have also now evidence showing how schools serve not only for learning, which of course is key, but also to shift mindsets, for girls to have the aspiration, to have the confidence, to have the skills, including life skills, skills for future job. And for boys to shift their thinking, what it means that girls have the same opportunities as boys, that they have the same capacity as boys. Also to learn about the important issues such as sexual and reproductive health, how to behave responsibly, how to avoid adolescent pregnancy. So these are all important aspects in which evidence shows what works. And finally, at the community level, right? It's also important to influence the fathers, the grandparents, so that they realize the returns to girls' education, the returns that are in fact intergenerational, because then whole families benefit in the future, And also to realize that actually it pays off for the households to maintain girls in schools instead of child marriage or instead of employing girls at home with household tasks. So the evidence is really key also to then make the case to ministers of finance, to governments on investing in girls' education and in the opportunities, in the empowerment for girls and women.
Now, on that note, in terms of what works, Nicole, what else do we know from youth programs and approaches about what works to advance the girl dividend?
Well, it's really picking up on everything that Hannah just said. We know it's about increasing the assets and increasing the agency, and we know a lot from youth programs broadly about what works in terms of the what in the how. So it's about improving the macroeconomic situation and addressing debt and inflation, which we know ultimately does in fact affect girls. But then to Hannah's point, it's those specifics and really getting into some of the design elements in terms of, again, the how for girls. So for example, we know that peer-to-peer programs really work in the intra-generational space, creating safe space for girls to talk to each other, to build social capital, to find mentors, but also that intergenerational piece we know is really critical, as Hannah mentioned. Just one example from an APT-led USAID-funded project in Uganda, which was a flagship resilience project, ran these mentoring camps for girls, 5-day camps that really focused on building skills, social capital, financial literacy. And in graduates of those camps saw an 85% return in terms of starting successful businesses with newfound financial linkages. Almost 85% of them increased their monthly income by 85%. A large percentage went on to continue learning and go back into adult education if they didn't have those opportunities. So we really see that those, taking those kinds of approaches that we know from positive youth development generally really works in particular for girls. And the other thing I'd say that we know in terms of the how of these programs is to let girls really lead, right? To really build that confidence, to enable them to take their voice forward and to really design and lead the programs with their peers, with their families and with their societies as a whole.
Hannah, how do adolescent girls and young women factor into the bank's new draft gender strategy?
Well, it is key to realize that, in fact, when you think about gender equality, it's adolescence where there is an important transition to be supported from girls' education to ensure that there is a continued education, continued skill development. As Nicole said, that there is also empowerment and opportunities for girls to emerge as leaders, and that there is a good transition also into the labor market with economic opportunities for women, and that girls are protected against the risks that are especially acute in adolescence. Take gender-based violence, take child marriage, take female genital mutilation and other forms of gender-based violence. There are lots of risks at adolescence that not only impact on the well-being of girls and then young women and throughout the rest of their lives, but also preclude girls to further develop and utilize their human capital. So all this evidence is reflected in the gender strategy that is proposed for the World Bank and that is now publicly available for consultations, and we are actively seeking feedback. In fact, I was just now I've arrived from Angola, where I learned a lot from the programs that the government is now implementing across the country with the support of the World Bank, focusing on adolescent girls and using schools and communities as a platform to promote girls' empowerment and it involves special programs for adolescent girls. It also includes special programs for boys, and also outreach to the community so that there is the enabling environment for adolescent girls. Now, in the new gender strategy, we are proposing three strategic objectives. The first is to end gender-based violence and elevate human capital. So for adolescent girls, this is really about foundational well-being. It is about avoiding child marriage. It is about having access to sexual and reproductive health information services and have the full package of services that is needed. The second strategic objective is to expand and enable economic opportunities, which for adolescent girls means giving them opportunities to build their skills for the future jobs, to build their confidence, to build their entrepreneurial spirit, the leadership skills, and so on. It is also about providing opportunities for improving access to assets, such as mobile phone, and access to enabling services, such as safe transports that can take them to jobs interviews and to the market, and so on. And three, important strategic objective, building exactly on what Nicole said, engage women as leaders, including engage adolescent girls as leaders, and really building the potential, and also building on the evidence that shows that when you include girls and women in decision making, the decisions are much better. We see it at the community level, for example, where when they participate in decision making, the services in the communities are, the coverage is better, the quality is better. So there are good evidence-based reasons why adolescent girls would play a key emphasis in also implementing and delivering on these three strategic objectives. And if I may add, based on evidence, what we see, what it will take, what are the drivers of change, and we see, these are the evidence-based solutions, like I mentioned, the girls' clubs in schools and so on. Nicole also provided some examples. Second, financing, and of course, it's the financing that internationally can be mobilized, but importantly, it's also assisting governments and in the private sector to prioritize financing that is geared toward gender equality and opportunities for girls, adolescent girls, and for women. And integrate really the analysis and these priorities in government revenues and expenditure policies as well as sector policies. And the third is collective action. Now, what we see is that the outcomes for adolescent girls will not improve without a massive collective action, without a massive comprehensive efforts that need to, of course, involve the policymakers. It also needs to involve local government officials, community leaders. In some countries, local religious leaders. I can give you an example from Sahel countries, where the World Bank is supporting all the Sahel countries, and in fact currently it's most of Africa West, with the Sahel Women Empowerment and Demographic Dividend Program, which is actually focusing on adolescent girls, on keeping them in schools, improving sexual and reproductive health information services and rights for girls, building life skills, connecting them to future economic opportunities, and engaging in that process, engaging also local religious leaders in communities to influence the mindsets of the fathers and of the future husbands of these girls. So these are the effort of collective action, so the emphasis on partnerships and really wider stakeholder engagement. So that's just to conclude, that's why I also find these annual meetings truly extremely valuable, because we are identifying new partnership opportunities and new ways to act collectively toward gender equality and toward the opportunities and better lives for girls in the future.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful. Nicole, I want to turn it over to you again. What are you hearing from adolescent girls and young women in terms of their own priorities?
Thanks for that. And I think it's some of the probably similar items that Hannah and her colleagues hear when they're doing different consultations. And also, it's things that I think are on the minds of young women and girls, but also their male colleagues, right, of young people, I think, as a whole, also more broadly. I think that's part of one of the things that we hear is really gender equality is on the minds of young people, mental health is really an issue that we hear has become that much more kind of critical, but also on the positive side, they're talking about it more, and I think that that's really part of the equation. Climate, which again, going back to one of the key issues which disproportionately impacts, can negatively impact girls and young women, but at the same time, we hear they're excited about the opportunities in the green economy. They're excited to participate in that. And similarly, as Hannah mentioned, the digital piece. And that also relates to really opening up the broadest opportunity for connections and social engagement, importantly for that financing piece. We see that girls are interested in business, they're interested in being entrepreneurs, they have very broad aspirations. And of course, they're interested in care and in education, and in all of the human capital and the sort of social infrastructure that will enable them to succeed. So they're thinking about their own lives, but they are very much interested in their peers and the community, and as I kind of go back to being part of the solution, being part of the policy process, and building those partnerships with each other, within society, and with their sort of colleagues around the world. So I get excited and I'm inspired every time I talk to another young woman. In fact, just yesterday I was meeting with some of the IMF Youth Fellows and a number of the young women and young leaders, and just so inspirational. And just quickly, because Hannah mentioned that you had been in Angola, our colleagues actually just yesterday did an interview with the minister and was talking about she was talking about the inclusive growth. So really exciting to hear that important link.
Now, and I want to circle back to the bank's gender strategy. It aims to end gender-based violence. What do you think is needed to make that a reality?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking this question. It's gender-based violence is it's perhaps the most pervasive human rights violation. Unfortunately, the situation has further deteriorated with the pandemic. And it is urgent for the well-being of girls and women in particular, but also for the well-being of the entire society and for the well-being of the economy. We have the evidence that how much it costs in terms of also opportunity lost for the economy. We see from data that women in many countries around the world are citing gender-based violence in public spaces, sexual harassment in transport, sexual harassment in workplace as the key deterrents for them when it comes to their participation in the labor force or their ability to move to more productive jobs. So this all has a huge economic cost. Now, having this evidence allows us to convince the ministers of finance that gender-based violence in many countries is really national priority to be addressed. So what it will take? Well, it will take some innovations, and we have some very good examples. For example, at community level, bringing the key services together and making them accessible to women survivors. So when it comes to health services, when it comes to justice services, when it comes to having safe space. So at the community level, often with the involvement of local community organizations or civil society organizations, we have some excellent examples of approaches that work. Most recently, for example, in Haiti, supported by a World Bank operation. So these are the innovations. Of course, the innovations require financing. Right? Investing into the services, investing into the capacity of the service providers, investing in the programs in schools, where actually, well, number one, you need to address gender-based violence in schools, but number two, you also have opportunity to engage with boys as well as girls, to shift their mindsets about masculinity and about violence, which is key for preventing gender-based violence in the future. So that all requires financing. And three, it requires collective action. The example of engaging the local religious leaders or community leaders. Recently I was also in Mozambique, where I visited communities in the northern Mozambique in fragility context, and I saw the community leaders engaging with households and sharing with them how bad gender-based violence is and how important it is to behave to each other respectfully. And through this operation that is also supporting community facilitators that work together with the community leaders and really go door to door as well as organize community gathering. And then I've seen as a result of all these interventions through this operation, which again the government is now expanding across the country, actually, hearing from men, from even like old men, the grandfathers as well as fathers saying, well, we've really changed how we behave to each other. We really are behaving now much more respectfully. Like, an old man told me, I now respect my wife much more than before. And I see that the relationships in the households and in the communities are much more respectful. There is less violence and more respect, more dignity. So I think that's what it takes really, having the evidence-based innovations. Of course, investing further in some evidence, coming back to your first question, right? We still need to invest into more evidence on what works. And then we need the financing and working with governments and the private sector so that the financing is sufficient to translate these innovations really into actions at scale across countries, and really getting partners, getting champions, and involving the influencers from the global to national to the local community levels.
I think getting partners, getting champions, dignity and respect is an excellent note to wrap our discussion up. I'm going to thank you again, Hannah Brixey, for joining us, Nicole Golden for this fascinating conversation, and of course the Atlantic Council, which you can always go to their website to learn more. And once again, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.